the WTS webinar. This is Ashley McLean. I'm the representative from Heart of Texas, and I will be kicking us off today and then introducing our MC. We have a few infomercials that I'll be interjecting with. I believe we have almost all of our presenters logged in. Our last presenter said she'd be a couple minutes late, but that's fine because she's our last presenter. Hopefully everyone is able to see our screen via Adobe Connect. The presentation audio is a separate dial-in number. Hopefully everybody got clear instructions on our login information. We are going to do questions and answers at the end of the presentation, and please use the chat box for that. Again, if everyone who's not speaking stays mute, then we'll minimize background noise. With that, I will go ahead and launch into talking a bit about WTS. I do want to thank CM Squared, the Cooperative Mobility for Competitive Megaregions. They are our someone has put us on hold music. Let's give it a minute. Do you have a way to mute people or garner into mute people on your end? I'm just going to speak up here. This is Lisa Loftus-Otway. Someone who has joined us on their phone has either put their phone on hold or in some other function that's not mute. And while the music is quite lovely, and I'm happy to speak this and scream at you, and Ashley too, if anyone who's done that, if you can please turn it off, we would appreciate it. Thank you. All right, we may have achieved the slide. Ashley, you should be able to move the slide. If you click on the button down in the bottom left corner of the screen, you should see two arrows. There you go. Okay, I got it. So WTS is now a very large organization. We have more than 6,500 members. We've been around for 40 years. We have more than 40,000 professionals in our network. We have local chapters across the U.S., Canada, and the United Kingdom. There are several components to our mission. One of our mission components, though, is pretty central to the Southwest region, which is reaching out and sharing professional information development opportunities such as the webinar today. The Southwest region is one of several. The Central started in 2013. Southwest region started in 2016, and we have representatives from Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Texas, and we're working on getting representatives and chapters in Arkansas and New Mexico. Our representatives are shown here. We have representatives from Dallas, Houston, Heart of Texas, San Antonio, Oklahoma, Louisiana. Our newest participant chapter is Greater New Orleans, so we're happy to have them on board. And we're also fortunate to have Susan Martinovich serving as our liaison with the International Board. Just a quick note, the region is
kind of a communication organization. We don't have a separate budget or anything, but we work to connect chapters with each other and to connect to the international region. And a couple of things we've done, we've had coordinating calls among membership chairs and program chairs so that our established chapters can help new chapters get up and running. Throughout our presentation today, break over the holiday, and then we'll have our business luncheon at the end of January and start our program lunches again on February 20th. I'm very pleased to have the pleasure of introducing Lisa Loftus-Otway, who is our MC for today's event. She is a WTS leader extraordinary. She's been head of several committees, including professional development. She was our chapter president. She now serves on the international board. She is at the Center for Transportation Research at UT. She's a lawyer by training. She's the assistant director for research at Center for Cooperative Mobility for Competitive Megaregions, and she'll talk a little bit more about that. She does a lot of really interesting work on the intersection between land use and transportation, especially freight. She's a good friend, and I think she'll be a great MC for our events today. So without further ado, Lisa, tell us about megaregions.
So this is your 101 primer on megaregions. And so first of all, I just really want to say thank you very much to WTS Southwest Region for hosting CM Squared. I actually have our director of our center sitting in here. We're all in the conference room in the Dean's chamber here in the School of Architecture at UT, so we're really, really thankful that you are willing to put us on your slate of interesting things to provide webinars for. And hopefully you will see today that we have speakers who they take us through the whole gamut from sort of the high theory of what are megaregions through to actual on-the-ground activities at a large or a megaregion area. They've been identified throughout the world, but they are definitely identified by a series of relational activities, whether it be environment, topography, water, economics, infrastructure, cultural, historical components, and then freight flows. And the megaregional theory first really took hold here in the US with a geographer who in the late 50s, his name is Gene Gottman, kind of identified the northeast corridor as a megaregion. And essentially, after that, it sort of laid in abeyance until the very early 2000s, and then other folks started to get involved in looking at megaregional theory. And so Catherine Ross actually has written a couple of textbooks in this area. She's from Georgia Tech, and so this is her set of identified megaregions that she has come out with, and she has done a lot of work for the Federal Highway Administration in helping them as they were setting out a megaregion policy. And then, again, there have been some other people. So these are Lang and DeVale from Virginia Tech. They really focused their megaregions in on looking in at corridors and combining, in terms of how they put their methodology together, their megaregions had at least 2 metropolitan areas. They were contiguous, and they were trying to occupy sort of a specific area within the landscape. And they were also trying to create what they called a usable geography for looking at planning within this area. And then these are the Federal Highway identified megaregions, and they just recently updated this. So if you look and see the Mid-South running up from Mississippi up sort of focusing their energies and efforts on that. Another player in this field is Richard Florida. Some of you may have read some of his books. So he's at the Rothman Institute in Toronto, and he actually, if you type Richard Florida and megaregions, you will find a lot of work he did, but he wrote a couple of papers where he really looked at sort of the economics behind megaregions, and he identified initially 35 globally. That grew to 45 globally. And how they started sort of their methodology was they looked at a nighttime map of the world. And if any of you have one of those maps, I have one in my house, and it's probably old now, it's probably more light in the world. But if you overlay that with the American megaregions, you definitely see correlations. So hopefully I'm getting you more off the 40% track that where you may have been prior to this webinar to a little bit further down the road. I did actually teach a class in planning for megaregions for 6 years here in the planning school at UT, and I used to tell my students I'm still at 80%. There's 20% of me that still thinks this could this all be hocus pocus. But the more and more data that came through, the more I really thought this is definitely a reality that we live in. And strangely enough, this came up in Wired magazine a couple of years ago, and this was a paper that was done by a professor from the University of Sheffield and a professor here at Dartmouth College, and they looked at community maps. And that, for me, was like, okay, I'm 100% now. And when you really look at these maps, and you can, if you Google that title on this presentation, you can go and find all these maps, and they actually put all the data behind the mapping they did out in the public domain. So it's he is the Dean of Design at the University of Pennsylvania, which is one of the CM Squared partners, and he used to be here, the Dean of Architecture at UT. Fritz sent this to me, and this was another kind of game changer in my mind when you really see just how in how few counties within the U.S. we were starting to live in. That data has probably grown since 2013 because we're 5 years on. But again, when you overlay a megaregions map over that, there are definitely ties and linkages within this. And so this is where I now got to being 100% a believer in megaregions. It's just the data is bearing out what these original folks back now 15, 16, 17 years ago were starting to hypothesize. So you are now all complete experts in megaregions. We could set you a test at the end of this and it would be good, but I'm now going to turn it over and talk a little bit quickly about the CM Squared Center. Can someone just mute their phone? Sorry, you've got unmuted. Okay, I'm going to carry on. So the CM Squared Center is what is known as the U.S. Department of Transportation Tier 1 University Transportation Center. We are now currently in our 3rd year of operation. It's a grant that comes down every year, and so the 4 universities that you see on the screen, these are the partners that are involved in it, and obviously, as you will see, you have speakers today that are from Louisiana State University and Texas. Areas within these megaregion maps that you look at. And so we have a lot of here, as we say, expected outcomes, and we've been trying to do a lot of teaming work, really trying to reach out to other folks, you know, in this work, somewhat to ground truth components we're doing, and also so that we can be developing tools and methodologies and other items that are useful for the public sector in planning, and then for the private sector who do a lot of on-the-ground work of getting planning onto infrastructure in the ground. And so, again, we are really delighted as the CM Squared folks to be here today. And I'm actually, like I said, I'm joined by our director of the center, Ming Zhang. I'm also joined by my co-assistant director, Inessa Ah, who she's in charge of all our operational sides, and then 2 of our fabulous GRAs, Nicole and Paulina, who are with us. So putting some muscle power and intelligence into this. But I'm going to take us on to our next infomercial. So Ashley, would you like to jump in here, please?
Sure. Thank you, Lisa. Our Houston chapter has a diversity luncheon on November 15th, and I'm very excited to be part of that panel. And then on December 11th, they have their holiday reception planned. And then our San Antonio chapter has a leadership and latte event on November 19th with Andres Andujar. That should be really interesting. December 6th, they have kind of a book club, and they'll be getting together to talk about Drop the Ball, Achieving More by Doing Less. Sounds like a great book. December 13th, they have a mega mixer.
Two speakers, Dr. Carol Lewis and Dr. Gwendolyn Goodwin from Texas Southern University. So when you read Carol's bio, you can see she's a phenomenally accomplished person. She's a personal friend, and Carol and Gwen and I have also worked together on quite a few different projects over the years. But Carol's research focus is it's multifaceted, but it includes rail, megaregions, environmental justice, and transit planning. She's served on many different boards in the Greater Houston area, and she sits on the Transportation Advisory Council for HGAC, and then she was also, a couple of years ago, awarded TRB's Sharon D. Banks Humanitarian Award, and Sharon D. Banks was a very pivotal originator within the WTS, and in fact one of our undergraduate awards is named after her too. So it's really nice to see all these tie-ins when they live in life, but it's really, when you're looking at the kind of quality of speakers we're giving you, Carol really is it. And then Gwen Goodwin, if I move you forward to her bio. So Gwen Goodwin, she's an assistant professor, and she's the director of TSU Center for Transportation Training and Research. She has over 30 years of experience, and again, I have worked with Gwen on projects, and her research focuses on sustainable and safe solutions to transportation and mobility issues, and she really does focus in on seniors, teens, and pedestrians and other vulnerable communities. And again, Carol and Gwen are both part of the big research team in our CM2 consortia. So Gwen and Carol, I am going to hand over to you. So if you want to move your slides yourself, you're welcome to do so, or I'm happy to do that for you.
So Lisa, I'm happy for you to move the slides for me. And the only thing Lisa has talked to you about our CM2 project focus and what we're trying to do. The bold burgundy here repeats that focus. But in addition to that, we have subtopics. And so for the research that we're conducting, we're focusing on the two subtopics that you see there: increase access to opportunities that promote equity in connecting regions and communities, including those that are urban and rural, and developing recommendations for roles, requirements, and responsibilities for the agencies in order to scale up regional planning services and the activities done by those regional planning agencies. The title of our work, specifically our research specifically, and so Lisa, if we can advance now. The title specifically for our work is Determining Purpose and Need for Vulnerable Communities in the Megaregion. And the reason we want to do that is that for most of us on the call recognize that the focus in gaining access to funding, whether at local, state, or federal levels, is in showing, identifying, and quantifying need. So in order for projects to be competitively compared with others for those scarce dollars, we need to be able to be very specific in what our purpose is, what our need is, and what we're trying to accomplish. That helps us to focus on the transportation challenges that need to be addressed. And so we want to be able to identify the gap between need and existing condition. Our specific research question here is, are there vulnerable communities with a need for increased travel opportunities into urban areas from the interstices in the US 290 megaregion corridor? So our main megaregion within Texas is the Triangle. It's anchored by Dallas on the north, Houston on the southeast, San Antonio southwest, and then the corridor running straight through goes through Austin. The blue arrow that you see and the line on the graphic map furthest to the right show that link between Houston and Austin. So Austin is the seat of government. That is our 290 corridor. And so it is the area of focus for us because we know that there is a high level of need within that corridor, and those anchor cities of Houston and Austin are attracting many, many trips and address many of the needs that we know happen in that corridor, particularly as it being seat of government for us. In addition, there are 12 universities between that corridor, between Houston and Austin. And so we think combine the needs both of the rural residents and those university students in traveling, it will give us a good base, a solid base from which we can identify those travel needs. So we want to identify a rubric that planners can use to pull together the numerics necessary to quantify the need and to, again, put these potential projects in good position to compete for very scarce federal funding. You see and mitigations that must be addressed as we try to identify the gaps. The US 290 corridor, you'll see a close-up of this area that's anchored by Houston and Austin. There are 6 counties there, and so our focus of our research centered on 5 miles either side, so essentially a 10-mile swath that parallels the US 290 corridor. If we talk about why it matters, why this work is important to us, we will note that the U.S. Department of Transportation prepared a document called Beyond Traffic 2045. In that document, they note that there are increasing numbers of low-income, ethnic, and seniors that need attention as part of our transportation communities. They also document the importance of planning across jurisdictional boundaries, and so the majority of our planning efforts are done by parameters and that give us boundaries for our jurisdiction. And so travel that happens across those jurisdictional boundaries, not really attention to quantifying what those needs are, and that's why we think this is so important. We need opportunities to increase mode choice. Work by Federal Highway Administration showed that Texans use their automobiles, their single-use automobiles, at above 91% for commutes, and that exceeds the national average by a lot. So those of you who know numbers, gap the last point is the seamless intercity and intra-city connections are important. And so we see that work done shows that travel is hugely important.
General concept
now. Okay, I have to say this is bothering me.
Excuse me, someone who is not our speaker needs to mute their phone so that our presenter can speak. Thank you.
And think, because it's kind of, I was trying to just go past it, but at a point I thought, okay, hold it. All right, so thank you. So the last sort of point is that the geographic boundaries and removing them has the potential to really improve quality of life for a lot of individuals if we can think about how to get travel facilitated across these jurisdictional boundaries and increase the linkages that are available for people across the jurisdictional boundaries. So what are we trying to help people access? What kinds of travel needs are there? So if we talk about livability and access to opportunities, we look at jobs, We look at transportation options. We look at health care and maintenance, recreation and entertainment, and social contacts. Work around the world has shown certain countries are recognizing the importance of seniors and social contacts as we as a nation age. London and England equation and what we're actually thinking is important to provide needs and access to, in addition to those traditional things that we think about, people getting to work and getting to their health care. So moving to the next slide and talking about why we think it's important for the people in the interstices to be able to get into our urban and our anchor cities. We see that when looking at economic engines, and if you go to that Texas cell, you'll see that between the anchor cities that we talk about in our mega region, there's a very large percentage of our national GMP that occurs within those urban areas. And so by implication, the things that people need are going to be there. The concentration of jobs, the concentration of healthcare activities, the concentration of social activities. And so again, for people who are not in the urbans but still increasing their quality of life by allowing them to access these amenities and necessities in the urbans and helping them to do that at money they can afford, we consider something that's important for our transportation professionals to investigate. So going to the next slide, our methodology in pulling together the numerics that we've referenced. We first of all reviewed the literature for state of the practice and how to determine vulnerability and vulnerable populations within literature in our state of the practice, and then pull numerics for those particular criteria. We looked at the type and level of service that's currently being offered in the interstices in these communities to see and create the foundation and baseline for what's there as we look to identify and then measure the gaps. And then starting conversations with those who are providing and who are working in these areas to help us identify gaps. And in that vein, we had a workshop in September with all of the MPOs that are involved in the area from Houston to Austin and in between, and the folks who are providing transit services. And so all of that you'll hear a bit more about later. So at this point, I'm going to baton hand to Gwen, and she's going to concentrate on providing the data and results that we've seen thus far.
So, hello everyone. So in this slide, you'll see all of the counties, the 6 counties that were in the US 290 corridor. And we wanted to provide a snapshot of the population, employment, and poverty rates. As you can see in the chart, in terms of population, most of it, the largest, most heavily populated areas were in Bastrop County and Waller County. And just something to take note of, Waller County is home to Prairie View A&M University, which is a historically black college or university. Bastrop and Waller also have the largest amount of jobs in the region. And in terms of data points here. And then again, this is just a slide of the 6 county study areas that we see along US 290A. and those are Austin, Bastrop, Fayette, Lee, Waller, and Washington. And among these 6 counties, there were 76 block groups identified. Some of the key variables that we looked at was minority population and low income. Now, of course, these are some of the same variables that you see when you look at environmental justice. And we wanted to move beyond that. So as Carol alluded to, we sort of looked across the country to see what other people were using, and we decided that these are some variables that we should use. And so we chose to include senior population, zero car ownership, female-headed households, and language proficiency. So what about the results? So the results were not as interesting at first glance. So we didn't really see anything too significant. And in fact, with Fayette County, we found that while they had a high senior population, they had some of the lowest poverty rates, and they weren't really coming up as a county with significant using this filter. So what happened was this yielded 34 block groups. And of these 34 block groups that we have identified now as vulnerable, 7 of them were categorized as having high needs or vulnerabilities, and 2 were categorized as having very high needs and very vulnerable. And these 9 block groups were found in Austin, Bastrop, Lee, Waller, and Washington, with Bastrop having 3 and Waller and Washington each having 2. So this slide is just an example or a graphic of those 34 vulnerable block groups with the counties that I mentioned. And this is the 5-mile boundary that we use on US 290. And with this one, we found, again, that Austin has the highest poverty rate. If we can go to the next slide. So in this slide, we're looking at just another glimpse of poverty, minority rate, elderly, and auto, zero car ownership. And here we find that Austin County has a 26% poverty rate. And then, again, I mentioned that Waller and Bastrop had a 67% minority population. And then Austin County has the highest senior percentage at 18%. Block groups. This is, you'll see that these vulnerable populations, you'll see that against the counties and against Texas. On the next slide, we have the comparison of the 6 counties to, my screen went blank. And here, what we want to point out the most is that in most areas, everything was a little higher, but the 3 areas that stuck out the most was, again, the minority population, which was much higher than when we looked at the 6 counties that we were measuring it against. So for those for those 34 vulnerable block groups, their scores were exceeded the 6 counties. And then also no English. That was also a high variable. On the next slide, so what did we learn? Well, we learned to expect the unexpected. So in the study group, there were a lot of seniors, but not all the seniors were poor. And we also found that most people had cars, but one of the things we wanted to point out, but what happened if? What happens when the car breaks down and needs repair? or what happens if someone goes to work and then everyone else in the household is left without transportation. And we also thought, what happens when seniors choose to stop driving or limit their driving in some way? What happens? And then finally, what if there's a medical need and treatment needs to occur either in Houston's Medical Center or in Austin? More on transportation. Also, with accessibility to work, food, and recreation, as Carol alluded to earlier, having access to recreation is very important, especially for senior populations. And if you live in a rural community and you are of working age, you certainly want to be able to have a way to get back and forth to your job from a neighboring county or even in one of the larger counties of Harris County, which is Houston, and Austin, which is Travis. And then unbanked. So we talked about how would someone that is vulnerable or lives below the poverty level, how would they handle an emergency? Usually there's not a lot of cash around for them to be able to absorb the cost of a car breaking down or someone sick. And then finally, with internet access. While this is not a factor for most of us in the urban area, there are still some places where internet access is limited. And so what do you do when this happens? In fact, it was very funny because communications, one tower went down at Prairie View, and so all the students were in a panic because they didn't have access to their phones. They couldn't make any phone calls. They couldn't complete papers. So for once, they had a legitimate reason for not turning in an assignment. And along this US 290 corridor, there are several colleges, as Carol mentioned earlier, with Prairie View and Blinn Community College being directly along this 290 corridor, and with Texas A&M being 50 miles just north of the 290 corridor. So this option offers students a way to get rides to events or a way to get a ride to a major area and simply by using an app. And then we also spoke with the rural transit authorities. There are several that operate in some of the counties, but one that we're highlighting today is CARTS, and that's the Capital Area Rural Transit. And in particular, they offer some services between Bastrop and Austin and other surrounding areas. They also, in our corridor, that's what we were looking at, but they also offer services along I-35 from Austin into San Marcos. So for the people that use this service, they love it. Unfortunately, like everything, there's more people that need and want the services than their agency has money. So they would like to expand, but they're working with the resources that they have currently. And before we go on, I'd also like to note that in our corridor, as we look east on I-10 going from Houston to Beaumont and into Louisiana, we've also noted with some work in that Beaumont area, areas being able to make it into Houston. For example, how would you have a smooth ride from a smaller city into Beaumont and then from Beaumont into the Houston region? On the next slide. So we also looked at some private transportation options, and Megabus and This is sort of compared to our luxury line. So Megabus has been operating in our mega region for more than 9 years, and the service offers direct services to Houston, Dallas, and Houston and Austin. But what is important to note is that they really do not stop to pick up new clients in any of the rural areas. The same would be true of Von Lang, which really caters to the business clientele, and as these business folks are traveling to Dallas and Houston. So they really don't make any stops as well.
So Gwen has given you the data concentration for what we've learned to date, and a little bit about what we learned about services that are available now. So one of the things that we want to do is to make sure that we've identified the gaps and then look at the difference between what's currently available and where we'd like to be, our potential need, so that we can begin to work with the MPOs and the transit agencies to identify projects and to prepare themselves to meet those needs. So currently, there is no transit service at all in Waller County. We understand that someone is thinking about it. There are plans for MPOs that people who are not extremely ill but need access to medical, those services are not there for them, even when people are able to leave the hospital and could take a transit option, but there's nothing there. The Interstice MPO has inadequate resources for planning and policy. So one of the things that we learned through the workshop is that one of the MPOs only has one planner. And so, you know, the takeaway from that is that's certainly not enough to focus on the increasing needs of people in these communities, you know, because they are too growing. Even though some of them may be having some population loss, they are indeed growing, and the people who live there need a lot more attention than they're getting.
And so I'm going to click back in and just say we also thought that we need to further bifurcate the senior group, and we wanted to make a clearer distinction and acknowledge the activity levels that are apparent amongst senior cohorts, and maybe look at having a breakdown of 65 to 75, because this group is still very, very active and drives a lot and still willing to make a lot of trips, versus older seniors once they reach a certain age. And
People in Texas tend to spend a higher percentage of their income on transportation as compared to people around the rest of the nation. I think we want to look at that particularly in these communities, because at this moment they have cars and they are moving around, but we speculate and theorize that they're spending an increasing percentage of their income on transportation, and probably more than those in urbans. And so we want to look at that again as a way to quantify why there is a need here, because these folks, especially those with the lower incomes, are having to spend an increasingly high percentage of their income on getting around because it's their only option. We want to look at what's going on across the MPOs to see if just performance measures can be standardized, and even the way we talk about the performance measures can be standardized as a way to, again, help the communities better position themselves as they're competing for funds. Making sure that the vulnerable block groups, that we look at them not only as block groups, but actually look at them in combination, again, to identify where the voids are. And then Gwen has already mentioned expanding the work to other corridors. So once we've sort of wrapped up this US 290 corridor piece, we then want to move to the I-10 corridor between Houston and Beaumont in specific. And then as we proceed, kind of work our way around the rest of the mega region and the state. So we talked about our mega region being anchored by our triangles, but we also refer to it as the mega region with the extension that actually what we've done to help all of these areas that are in between the large anchor cities within the mega regions. So I think that concludes our portion, and we thank you for your attention and look forward to discussion later.
Thank you very much. Yes, we'll have questions and answers at the end. One more reminder, if you're not the presenter, please mute your line. Thank you very much. Just a quick infomercial about our Louisiana chapter. They have Coffee and Conversation on November 14th, and they have their annual awards banquet on November 29th with keynote presentation by Dr. Sean Wilson, and they have a luncheon on December 12th. We want to extend a great welcome to the Greater New Orleans chapter. They're our newest chapter. That's part of our Southwest region, so we look forward to coordinating with you all. And with that, Lisa, I will let you introduce Dr. Wilshon.
Okay, so hi everybody. So as I'm doing this, I'm going to be swapping into a next slide set, just to let you know. But we're really thrilled again to have another one of our CM Squared partners, Dr. Brian Wilshon. And again, as you can see, Brian is a professor of engineering at LSU, and he's also the director of the Gulf Coast Center for Evacuation and Transportation Resiliency. He's got more than 25 years of experience. I was joking with him the other day that I think he got his PhD at 10 because he's so young and vibrant. But he's conducted research across every kind of agency that you can possibly think of. Brian, don't kill me, but I had to say. Folded within many of our regions, and certainly here locally, here in Austin and in the greater Central Texas area recently. I mean, we've had unprecedented flooding, things that certainly took me by surprise on just how fast and how quickly rivers can flow up, etc. You know, and then handling the needs of people that do need to get out of harm's way. And so with that, I will turn you guys all over to Brian. And Brian, you should be able to move the screen forward and back.
Great. Thank you so much, Lisa. I appreciate it. And also thanks to everyone for the invitation. It's certainly an honor and a pleasure to be invited to speak on this webinar. So for a little background also, as Lisa said, you know, I work in areas related to emergency transportation, and we've been doing that for probably 20 plus years at LSU. And what we did, kind of the genesis of this project is we had a student who came from China, Zhao Zhang, who you see listed, and he came many years ago, and he was very interested, obviously, in emergencies, but in China, the way that they view transportation and megaregions is a little bit different than the U.S., where we have, you know, mega regions in the tens of millions of people. They have mega regions in the hundreds of millions of people in China. So that Herrera, who's on the call, Scott Parr, Katie Spancel, who is now gone from LSU. She works in Houston. They were also people who were involved in this process as we went. So the question is why the heck would we look at an evacuation across a mega region level? Well, for some background, when we look at evacuation planning or emergency planning, what a lot of people would always suggest is that we're always planning to fight the last war, meaning that we'll have a major disruptive event, whether it's a hurricane or some other type of major emergency, and then what we do is we run to make plans to better accommodate transportation and traffic and the movement of people based on that last event. Well, probably about 10 years ago or so, there was a kind of a shift in thinking where what was suggested is that really what we need to do is focus on what's called the maximum of maximums. So these would be events that maybe we haven't seen before or might be unanticipated, but could happen. I mean, they're within the realm of possibilities. How likely they are to happen is very, very small probability. But what we will say a lot of times is planning is cheap and modeling is cheap, and it's nice to at least have a view of maybe what could happen in a worst case scenario and maybe never have to use it. Now, I know that goes against a lot of traditional tend to change a little bit. So basically what we did, or what I did is work probably a good now 15 years ago on the planning for the evacuation of New Orleans. And that was not for Katrina, but actually years before Katrina when they developed what's called a contraflow plan, which involves a reversal of lanes or of traffic flow out of the city. So instead of just using the outbound lanes, you actually prohibit traffic from moving in the inbound lanes and use that infrastructure to move traffic in the outbound direction. That was done for, hello? That was done for the city of New Orleans way back in, or we worked on that way back in 2003, 2004, prior to Hurricane Katrina. And then when it was used, it was found that it was really, really effective at moving traffic. So there was some feeling that, based on observations of traffic volume, that not only did traffic or does traffic move out of Louisiana into Texas when threatened by major hurricanes, but we also see that traffic will come out of Texas and move into Louisiana. So there was also a contraflow plan that was developed for the west side of Louisiana as well, and then in the years since, obviously there's now contraflow plans that are quite extensive throughout coastal Texas. The other motivation for this was that if we look at the past history, we see that there have been hurricanes that have threatened that entire coastal area. Conditions. So what we wanted to see is what would that look like in terms of traffic and in terms of an evacuation? How bad would the congestion be? And would there be something that we could do to better prepare? So that was the motivation for doing this. So what we really wanted to assess was 4 different things in the projects that we have done since over the last 8 years. And the first is just looking at travel conditions, what clearance times would look like, travel speeds, travel distances, areas of congestion. And then look at the effect of various traffic management strategies like phased evacuation orders or contraflow in order to facilitate the movement of evacuation traffic. Then looking at something that we call the effect of the shadow evacuation. And shadow evacuation, we've seen both in Houston in particular, and other places as well, is that's when people who are not ordered to evacuate or who are directly threatened by the effects of an evacuation will evacuate anyway, and the problem with that is that they can clog major evacuation routes and prohibit the movement of people who are the most threatened. And then we look at the other side of the evacuation equation, which is the post-event reentry. So we look, those are some of the 4 projects that we did and what I'm going to talk to you about. So how we did it was basically using traffic simulation modeling. So traffic simulation modeling has and we can also involve millions of vehicles, and we can track those on a second-by-second basis. So what we needed to do that was the network topology, what the network looked like, how it was controlled. Then we had to try to understand what the evacuation or the evacuees' behavior would be in terms of when they would leave and where they would leave from and where they would go to, and how that translated into travel making. And then what we did is we simulated that at a mesoscopic scale, and then we both quantitatively and qualitatively assessed and evaluated the output from those models. So that was a basic process. So this slide, what you'll see is the actual model that we used or that we built to assess this network. And this is what we did is we built a base model, and we try to calibrate it to fit past evacuation events. This was done in Transims. A lot of you are probably not familiar with Transims. Transims was supposed to be the do-all, end-all simulation system for looking at activity-based travel simulation. It didn't really take off for a number of reasons, but it was really supported by the US DOT. But it's really good. Where it fails is in the user interface and in some of the other user friendliness aspects of it. But what it does do really well is it does stuff like this, where you took U.S. Census data as far as where the people were located, and based on, and I'll show you in a second, based on some research that was done by some colleagues here at LSU and other people elsewhere, what we're able to do is take certain scenarios and then overlay that with the population, where they're located, their proximity to a hazard, and be able to take that population and look at not just how many people evacuate, but when they're going to evacuate and where they're going to evacuate for. And this is done, or this was done, based on 6 different scenarios. So instead of looking at this, which is kind of describing the various scenarios, I'm a visual guy. Basically, scenarios 1 through 3 would be what I talked about earlier, a certain hurricane that had the potential, because of the imprecision in the forecasting capability, could threaten New Orleans or Houston, so both would be within the cone of error. Scenarios 4 and then 5 and 6 are actually 2 storms in the historical record that, as you see, basically moved across the entire Gulf Coast. And these types of storms are not unheard of, and they can also be very powerful as well. You've seen that recently with the hurricane that just impacted, Hurricane Florence, that just impacted the east coast of the United States. Scenarios. So what you see here is based on this low jump model which basically decides whether or not somebody's going to evacuate. Under those 6 scenarios, this would show how many people, in theory, would have evacuated based on those conditions. And I'm flying through this really quick because I only have a limited amount of time here. But let me talk to you about the results. So in terms of the travel condition, I'll just kind of highlight these really quick. What we saw was differences in the departure urgency as we moved through these scenarios. And what was interesting was it would also influence the routes that they took. But there was really no difference in between the amount of distance that these evacuees would have to travel, nor their speeds. But what we did see is that the clearance times tended to be shorter if it was a 2-day evacuation, because, and we see this a lot in evacuations, that there are these surges in traffic, and that depending on the conditions, and certainly depending on the congestion and media reports, that people will tend to either not evacuate where they might have before, or what they might do is take alternative routes. So what we're able to also see is some of the inefficiencies in the network, particularly in some of the limitations of current computational technology. So we see scenario 4, basically it kind of broke the computer, if you will. It basically crashed it. So that also was important because it showed us that we're still not to where we want to be to evaluate things at this level. And there's some other things going on here, but that kind of gets into some of the other details. In terms of the traffic management strategy, we saw that strategies like contraflow or phased evacuations can have a significant benefit. But what can also happen is that, again, depending on the specifics of the condition, what they can also do is oversaturate the network where contraflow ends, and that can actually make the evacuation worse. So what has to happen is when this contraflow ends, it's important to make sure that you don't try to bring that traffic together as some of the current plans would call for, but you continue to use branches within your network to keep dividing that traffic out instead of trying to bring it back together. In terms of the shadow evacuation, what we saw is that shadow evacuations, as we suspected, can significantly congest the networks. But again, depending on when they leave and how they leave, we see not just when people are when a lot of that big surge demand has kind of made it through the system, that you can still get people out in time, or at least before the onset of a hazard. In terms of and I'm sorry about this, looks like my slides and a lot of these got reformatted here, but in terms of the post-event reentry, it's what you would think, that it's sort of the opposite or the flip side to the evacuation, where everybody's flowing in instead of flowing out. But what was interesting is that the network performance was always consistently better than for that of the evacuation, even though the volumes were the same. And that was because we tended to see the evacuation demand getting spread out, because there wasn't this enormous sense of urgency where we had a surge in demand. What was also interesting is you could see once again that the better that all links are utilized, the more efficient the overall network will operate. So I won't go into these, but that's just a kind of a graphical way of what we saw. So the broad conclusions were that we were able to demonstrate the ability of current modeling technology to assess evacuations at the megaregion level on this really small scale or high fidelity scale. What's most important is that we see is bullet number 2, where we want to think of this as not just this model built for this megaregion or any megaregion, but it's really an illustration of the concepts of how traffic moves through networks when it's LSU campus, where we have these unidirectional surges in demand. So that's the big thing. I think the takeaway from this is the adaptability or the transferability to other road networks or population, to different traffic networks and threat hazards. The other thing is that's important is that this is of interest not just to the U.S. but also worldwide. And this is something that they are looking at particularly in China, as the guy who worked on this as a student 8 years ago is now a professor over there, and they have concerns that are even at a higher level. So that's just a really broad overview, giving you a sip of water out of a fire hose. And if you have questions, I'll do my best to try to answer them a little bit later. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wilshon. And yes, please be thinking about your questions. We'll take questions in the chat box after our next presenter. Lisa is going to switch us to the next PowerPoint.
This will come up. Amy's PowerPoint's just a big one, so.
Call. We'll also follow up just to our list of registrants for our logged in participants, if we can figure out how to do that, and we'll send the SurveyMonkey link as well as a professional development certificate that you can retain on the honor system. Okay, real quick, our last infomercial, our Oklahoma chapter is having their holiday party and silent auction on November 29th, and that will benefit their scholarship fund. And so Lisa will introduce our last presenter.
Yep, and so Amy, I'm just checking with you. Are you in presenter mode? There was someone called Amy, so I'm assuming that was you.
Yes, that's me. Thank you.
That's good. You're good. Okay, so I'm absolutely delighted to have as our final speaker Amy St. Peter. She's the Deputy Executive Director of the Maricopa Association of Governments. And as you can see, she coordinates a huge, diverse portfolio, and she's got an awful amount of experience in organizational development, economic development, aging, transportation, and civil rights. We're absolutely delighted that she's here, and I can absolutely say to you, as I said very earlier on, I was still at 80% until a couple of years ago. Is this mega-regional thing really real? But I interviewed Amy on another project last year, and she was probably the final person that made me be a believer at 100%. So thank you, Amy, for helping me to get to 100%. But when you really see the work that her MPO and that her region has been doing on the mega-regional front, I hope for all of you too, this will really sort of cement for you that thinking and planning on this scale is really useful for and Amy will show you, getting out ahead of the game at the MPO level, I think is critically important for planning. And so with that, I'm going to hand over to you, Amy.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And thank you so much to everyone for joining us on this webinar this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you are in the time zone. Really excited to be able to share our work with you and to be able to learn from you. So if you have questions, please do post those. And if you'd like to contact me after, my contact information will be available, and I look forward to hearing from all of you. If you can forward the slide for me, please, or turn over control of the presentation,
Amy,
that would be fantastic.
Amy, you should be able to do it. Just try clicking on the arrow.
There we go. Excellent.
Okay.
And there we are. So Partnering for Impact together in Arizona's Sun Corridor. The Sun Corridor is one of a handful of megaregions across the country. Depending on the work that we're doing, the partners that we're engaging, we define the Sun Corridor as at least Maricopa, Pima, and Pinal counties. And sometimes we do include communities going into northern Arizona as well as communities all the way down to the shared border with Mexico. Research has shown this opportunity for a while, but it really did take a crisis to get our attention. And this was that crisis. The Great Recession woke us up. We had very high foreclosure rates here, second worst in the country. At that same time, we had been developing and continued to develop very sophisticated transportation plans, and we've been earning national awards for years. The recession, though, made us realize two things. First, the point of transportation is really to move people and goods. But if people move because there are no jobs here and there are no goods to move because all the businesses have shut down, then really there is no point to developing transportation projects and plans. So we pivoted to leverage transportation other perspective in terms of why megaregions are so important and why transportation really is truly linked to the economy. Since 1985, a regional sales tax has funded approximately half of our transportation system. So when the sales tax goes down or decreases, we have less funding for transit, for arterials, and for freeways. The recession was the first time in our state history that our sales tax hit such lows. So we realized that if we're going to keep our transportation projects whole, we do need to stimulate the economy. And if we're going to move the economy, we need to work at a much larger scale at that megaregion level. The Sun Corridor is a powerful economic driver for the entire state. There are 15 counties in Arizona, but 84% of our state's population is contained within just 5 counties that compose the Sun Corridor. In addition, 87% of the state's tax collection base comes from these Sun Corridor counties. The Sun Corridor really gives us key strategic access to be able to position well for economic development. Transportation, of course, plays an important role. Our ability to move people and goods is aided by these freight connections that you see here to prime neighboring markets. For all of these reasons, we created forums to work together throughout the Sun Corridor. We've worked together on a number of different projects in different areas, different disciplines, but these are the ones that I'll be highlighting today. These represent our ability to work with diverse stakeholders such as universities, economic developers, exporters, international leaders, and transportation experts. And we're missing a photo perhaps. Yeah. Well, the photo that we're missing is a photo of the university presidents that came together. We realized in discussions through a presentation from one of our local colleges projects. Since the MOU was signed in 2013, we've supported a number of grants, bringing millions of dollars in important projects into our megaregion. We're able to cross academic rivalries for the greater good. We do a lot of this work, the majority of this work, through something that we call the Joint Planning Advisory Council. This is a partnership among the regional planning agencies in the Sun Corridor. We have signed an MOU that describes our roles and purposes for coming together. And it's here that we bring together elected officials and business leaders to strategize about our collective future, challenges, as well as opportunities. Throughout the years, we've worked together in a number of different areas. 2 years ago, we launched an initiative focused on exporting. We know that exporting helps to drive our economy, and we've partnered with economic development agencies and regional planning agencies throughout the Sun Corridor to celebrate exporting. And this is why, because we know that exporting is increasing overall and that it contributes to our economy in a very significant way, pumping billions of dollars into Arizona's economy. This is what we're exporting, but these are not the only things that we're exporting from the Sun Corridor. We've realized through our engagement in this project that exporting is very diverse throughout the Sun Corridor as well as the rest of the world. It can focus on things like the hobby market, showing success in the global market, and they're able to do so in part because of the support that we provide through the Megaregion. Continuing on with this international focus, we've also developed an international megaregion called Arizona between the state of Arizona and the state of Sonora in Mexico. We meet annually and lead delegations and trade missions to visit each other throughout the year. This results in important relationship building as well as sharing of resources. The Arizona Megaregion has an important economic impact, supporting billions of dollars in bilateral trade every single year. Our meetings draw elected officials from both sides of the border. These meetings facilitate deeper knowledge and partnerships that support important goals like economic diplomacy. Through these shared trade missions and visits, we walk through each other's streets, we visit each other's businesses, and we gain a better first-hand understanding of each other's cultures, political dynamics, and markets. Shifting gears to discuss a brand new project, we're very thankful to have just received a new grant from the Federal Highway Administration from the Acceleration Innovation Deployment Program. Through this grant, we're working with all of our partners throughout the Sun Corridor to develop a centralized data portal. Initially, this data portal will focus on transportation and socioeconomic data as well as performance metrics. We're going to leverage this data to drive economic development. Through this project, we're working with our partners all the way down to the shared border with Mexico because of the important freight connections. And this is why, because we know that freight drives our economy, exporting drives our economy. And with Mexico, they are the 15th largest economy in the world, pumping more than $15 billion into our economy. As these goals, we want to be able to impact 3 areas in particular in terms of the economy, equity, and the environment. In terms of the economy, we want to strengthen the connection between transportation and economic development. In terms of equity, we want to conduct deeper analysis throughout the megaregion on Title VI communities. And with the environment, we want to make the processes more efficient and streamlined to help us to be able to move projects that protect the environment as well as stimulate economic development. With one investment, we can have multiple benefits in all 3 of these areas. When we're sharing data that's been collected, analyzed, and visualized in a consistent format, we're able to achieve that much more. The impact can be significant, and we think will be achieved through these main areas. We look forward to working with all of our partners over the next 2 years to develop these concrete tools and processes to work together for greater impact. These are the lessons that we're learning throughout all of our work in all these various disciplines throughout the Sun Corridor. For example, we've realized that differences can lead to fragmentation, or they can lead to diversity and more robust planning depending on your focus. The Megaregion provides both a focus as well as a forum to create these lessons and help us to embrace this diversity. If we can embrace our diverse positions, so we can build connections across the Megaregion and throughout all of our partners. In engaging our partners, we've realized very keenly that in order to keep them, we need to add value to them. Someone might come to our meeting the first time because they like us, they know us. We need to do something because those small successes beget bigger successes as well. All of these lessons lead to very tangible benefits, such as stimulating the economy, driving coordination, and resulting in better data, as well as partnership and relationships. If you'd like to contact me at any time, please feel free to do so. I'd love to hear about your experiences and your questions working at the mega region level. And thank you very much for your time today. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Amy. Thank you to all of our speakers. That was excellent information. We're actually a little bit ahead of schedule. We're scheduled to go till 1:30, but if we finish before then, we'll let everybody move on to their Friday. But we would really be happy to have the opportunity to answer your questions. Please use the chat box. I will go ahead and start for any of our speakers with one general question that I had. You have a captive audience right now, a lot of folks that are in transportation or planning or related professions. How do you begin to share the concept of mega regions with the public in general, given that, you know, some of us are used to working with 15, 20-year planning horizons. The planning horizon is bigger for mega regions, and a lot of folks don't think beyond the next holiday.
Well, this is Carol Lewis. I guess I'll take a stab at that. I think with any new idea, new concept, it starts with just basic And so I think, you know, an introductory question could be, you know, if you're driving from Houston to Austin, how do you get there? Let people answer, and then ask them, how many counties do you cross? And it begins to, you know, help people understand that there are all these jurisdictional things that happen that make absolutely no difference to them when they're living their everyday lives. And then sort of lead that to the understanding that if we begin to see ourselves in a larger way, sort of as was described by the last speaker, and kind of take the boundaries and boxes off of the way we visualize ourselves, that there are great efficiencies, economies, and, you know, greater things we can achieve if we begin to look at things in sort of a mega regional out-of-box way. So I think it's just an opportunity, again, to expose and to have people begin to have conversations around the idea of mega regions.
Thank you very much. We have a question from Cox McLean, Houston. The evacuation for Hurricane Rita led to the worst traffic in Houston history. Is there a reason you didn't include Rita in your model?
Yeah, that's a great question, and let me tell you what we did, because I think it was a little confusing because I tried to go so fast and blow through it. What I said is that we did a calibration of the model based on prior kind of distribution of traffic. We did not use and we took two scenarios that happened mainly in Louisiana. Aspects, or try to reproduce certain aspects of a prior event. And we say, if we can get it to statistically represent those two events, any changes that we would make to the system would also reflect any differences that would change from those two events, if that's making sense. So what we can calibrate on is either an evacuation event, or we can calibrate on some other event like daily traffic. Now, the other thing that's important is that if you look at, and you probably can't go back to the slides, but I showed a slide with the participation rates. One of the other things why we didn't do that in Houston was because of the 6 scenarios, only one of them really showed a huge surge for Houston evacuation, and that was scenario 4 that we kind of struggled with. So we were trying to calibrate that area of the model kind of using some different criteria. So it wasn't as if we didn't look at it, but what we did is we looked at it in a different way. We didn't use that event, but that was just for calibration. It wasn't for the overall analysis of the evacuation. I mean, certainly when we ran those numbers, especially for scenarios 4, 5, and 6, there was an enormous demand that was generated. But if you have specific questions, I can certainly talk to you about it or try to answer that in more detail offline.
Thank you very much. 2 questions for Amy. They're not connected, but they're both for you. Did you consider connecting the Sun Corridor with Las Vegas in your mega region? And also, how hard was it to get public officials to buy into the mega region philosophy?
Excellent. Thank you. Those are both great questions. Yes, we do work quite a bit with Las Vegas, primarily through 2 different mechanisms, although we're always interested in more in how we can strengthen that relationship. One of those is through a planning, an association of the planning agencies throughout the Intermountain West, and we come together about annually, and we work together on issues of mutual interest. And so through that, Las Vegas is one of our close partners, and we're very happy to work with them. And that leads to the second point of working on shared infrastructure such as I-11. And so I-11 has been designated as an interstate highway. We don't have full funding for it yet. Portions of construction have already started, particularly in Nevada, and so that helps to bring people together. It helps us to kind of rally people around the mega region that could be developed between the greater Phoenix region as well as Las Vegas. To your second point, and this really does have some resonance with the first question as well, is how do we get the elected officials to buy into the mega region concept? And that's important with our elected officials have a mega region event, grant, activity, anything like that, we will have quotes by our elected officials, for example, in the press releases. If there's an event, we have our elected officials in key speaking roles at that mega region event because it helps them to own it. It helps them to get publicity for it, and it helps to increase their buy-in. And also, it really is significant to have elected officials throughout the mega region to have some relationship building. That occurs in one-on-one meetings, that occurs in group events, but that relationship building is really critical because then they can come to rely on each other and they come to trust each other. So for example, one of our mayors here in the mega region was working with one of our mayors in Arizona in the state of Sonora. They needed equipment for their police department, and so through a really innovative format, he was able to send him one of their police cars that they no longer needed here in Arizona. They're able to send it to Sonora, Mexico. And that happened because the mayors went to a baseball game together and they started talking, and it's really being very focused and very strategic about how do we build up those relationships, and then how do we champion the relationships once they've been established and continue to nurture them and support them. So I think the elected officials are open to this concept, and they just need the forum to be able to undertake this work and to develop those relationships.
Thank you very much. Another question, my family went through painful 5-mile-per-hour evacuation of Rita in 2005 after spending a whole day for a trip that takes 3 hours. Normally, they opted not to evacuate for Harvey. How do you
to try to assess some of those exact questions. So they're not easy to answer. So let me kind of try to give you some background. Based on what we know about what motivates people to evacuate or not evacuate, it is whether or not a person feels a direct and imminent threat to their life or safety. So what happens is that that is influenced by a lot of different factors. Some of them are real, some of them are imagined. The other problem that you're fighting against as well is that when it is a life and death decision, the tendency is to err on the side of caution and try to not over-alarm people, but to give them realistic information to try to help them to decide. That's what we know, and the problem is that when people will a lot of times bring up the fact that, look, this trip takes me a long time, or it's highly congested. The answer that I always have is yes, exactly. You have, bumper-to-bumper traffic during peak hours in Houston every day of the year. You can't so what has to happen is you try to balance the demand and the supply as best as you can. And one of the things that can be done is trying to spread that out either spatially or temporally, using alternative routes that people might not usually take, or try to spread that demand out over time such that you don't get a lot of congestion all at once. But I don't know if there's a magical solution for any of this that we would be able to say, okay, now we can evacuate the entire, southeast area of Houston in a matter of, just 5 or 6 hours. That's, realistically, it's just not going to happen. If you look at the plans that are in place in Houston right now, they're very robust, very, they take advantage of contraflow. They do a lot of things, but I would suggest that a lot of the public officials are not really that keen on using them. I think what if you look realistically at the threats, you could look at Harvey as an example. Every one of these events is very different, and the types of flooding that you get and the types of wind that you get are very different. But in terms of the people who are directly threatened, life and death, if you're 40 or 60 or 80 miles inland, you're not really going to have those life and death threats unless you're in a low-lying area. But it's a matter of trying to inform the public in the is that it's an independent decision, an independent choice of individuals to make, and people have to make that decision on their own, and that further complicates the process. And I know I covered a lot of ground in there, and I don't know if that answers the question, but it's a very complex issue for sure.
If I could jump in, it is complex, and I don't want to prolong it, but if anybody is really interested, HGAC has had documents online, and so their estimate is that it would take 45 to 48 hours to evacuate Houston if everything went smoothly, meaning there was absolutely no crashes anywhere, no breakdowns. So that gives you, at least an umbrella of an idea of how long it would take to evacuate the region. And that's that's presuming not everyone evacuates either. So it's like we've got like 6 million people in the region. So if you presume like a third of them, 2 million, try to evacuate, it's 45 to 48 hours under the best of circumstances.
Certainly a huge challenge. I'm going to combine a couple questions that have come in for our speakers. One of them, the question was directed to Amy, but any of you, have you pursued any legislative options to support mega regions? And sort of a related question, are you all working directly with transportation agencies to have this conversation about mega regions and mega region planning?
Hi, it's Amy. In terms of the legislative options, we've issued or had, for example, different governmental entities issue proclamations, but not legislation necessarily. In terms of the transportation agencies, absolutely, we're working very closely. We are a metropolitan planning organization ourselves, and we work very closely with our sister agencies throughout the mega region as well as the Arizona Department of Transportation. And it's been really critical to have them involved because they have tremendous sources of data and sources of influence that are important to this work. And so they've been involved in everything from, example, the new Sun Cloud grant. ADOT was the applicant for us for the mega region, so they're very involved, very deeply involved. And then even with the exporting, that's been very important to be able to pull the freight data and things like that that really help us to build a case for exporting and that link between transportation and economic development.
And this is Lisa. I'll also jump in here too. Federal highway, if you type in federal highway plus mega regions and whatever is your search engine of choice, you will see that they have done a fair amount of work. They've commissioned a lot of work. Catherine Ross has done about 3 or 4 pieces for them. Volpe has also done a fair amount of work for them. So having them somewhat involved in the game is good. And I did a piece of work for Federal Highways Office of Policy about 2 years ago now, looking at jurisdictional impacts and really sort of diving into the different components of federal legislation and then potentially state legislation with some recommendations. So it was an internal document for them, but they are looking at this area, you know, across the different divisions within federal highway. And I think having them at least sort of keep a page current and like Amy's be able to take, you know, such strong initiative as her COG is doing in this front. And Carol, you were at the Mega Regions workshop in Houston. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Okay, Lisa, you're going to have to help me. Which Mega Regions workshop in Houston?
The Federal Highway one that you were at a while ago.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. All right.
And they give you a slightly different name, right, as well. They weren't necessarily calling it Mega Regions.
Yeah, exactly. But basically that particular workshop was very focused on freight and on moving freight across states within the country. And so it was targeted. They actually went around the country doing one of these sessions for each of the FHWA regions. And so they actually have the documentation online, and so I would actually refer people to that. So especially like, you know, wherever you're from, if you have an interest in a particular region, go online and look for that particular document. Gwen was there too. Gwen, do you remember the name of it? Because they changed it to. I'll look it up. Go ahead and talk, yeah. And by the time we end, I'll tell you the exact name of it and maybe even where to find it.
No, I don't remember the name exactly of that one, but I thought it was a great discussion in looking at just for the freight movement. We had a lot of conversations with Oklahoma, and I think we also had someone from activity. And I think it was a giant first step. That was I thought it was a great exercise in realizing that we need to have all parties involved. Then I'm going to, while Carol is still looking for the name of this, I'm going to go back to the workshop that we had about our mega regions, about our mega region work, in that getting together these MPOs and councils of governments was very helpful. They're very much aware of all of the problems that they face when they're trying to plan. So they can only, as you know, they can only plan within their jurisdictions. And so they're very interested in being able to provide, for example, access from, I was talking about the Beaumont area into the Houston areas, and how can they do that with one seat or a couple of seats and a couple of tickets, and how do you how do you resolve all the payment issues with transportation? So they are in earnest talking about it, and I will say, especially one group, and they were from Brazos County, they were excited about the opportunity to talk with someone at CARTS or talk with HGAC, and they really enjoyed the interaction. So I think we want to continue to have discussions like this and invite them and see how they can collaborate more. I think they're looking for the opportunities, but if we don't provide the research or invite them to participate with us, they'll stay in their own little silos and continue to work.
And I had been trolling around on the website because they did produce a final report, and I've been trolling around trying to see if I could find the final report on the web, and I haven't been able to in the time we've been on the phone, but at least you have the name of it. And what I can do is get my hands on that final report, at least send it to Ashley/Lisa and make it available to folks on the phone call.
And also, if any of you are on LinkedIn, there is a CM Squared LinkedIn page. You can certainly link into us. And Nicole, once we get that, our Administrative GRA, Nicole, she will put that site up on LinkedIn and other information for you that's come out of the questions from this. So we can download all of this data out of Adobe Connect, so we'll do that afterwards. And we'll make sure that it's out and that you can access it by various means, etc.
Thank you. I want to say one thing, and then we'll have one final question and go ahead and wrap up. I just wanted to say, as a NEPA practitioner, I especially appreciate the presentation by Carolyn Gwynn about determining purpose and need for vulnerable communities in the mega region, because if you're doing a compliance project for transportation, an environmental compliance project, you have to anchor the whole thing on need and purpose. So if we're able to more broadly articulate our need and purpose, and we have the data to support that, then maybe we'll be able to work more on serving quote unquote vulnerable populations rather than just avoiding adverse impacts. So just a shout out there. I think that
leaders.
Sure, I'll be happy to open it up. Let's just get to this one last question, and then I will do that. Thanks for bringing that to my attention. I just thought this was a good question to end on. For those of us not in planning, how can we help talk about mega regions and the associated planning and improvements? If we're going to go out and sort of spread the word in an accessible way, do our speakers have some quick suggestions?
Hi, it's Amy. I think it's critically important to involve people who are not in planning. I mean, I think we absolutely need the planners at the table, but I think that others really can bring important perspectives to the work, so such as economic development, human services. Those are important, and it's not just about planning or transportation in the mega regions. It's about the whole quality of life. And if we don't have people from different disciplines at the table, then our planning is not holistic and it's not as robust as it could be. So I think that's an excellent point and something absolutely to keep in mind.
And,
So
Laura,
and this is
this is Carol as an add-on. I think a good place to start is with those folks who are interested in economies. So your partnerships, your Chamber of Commerce's, your business communities, those kind of folks who are usually looking for things that help the economy to remain robust. And I think mega-regional thinking is one of those avenues that really, sort of secures and helps you to think about your economy in maybe a little different way than you have historically.
And this is Brian. From move to these other areas if there's some kind of a major event like that. So not only does it affect the origin community, it also affects the destination, and it also affects all the roads that connect those two places in between. Then the other thing I would say also that we found from the modeling perspective and from the work and the assessments that we've done is that a lot of the findings that we see are scalable. So whether it's at a mega region or at a city level or at a community or even an event level, the same concepts tend to hold true. They're just on different spatial and temporal scales. So the lessons that we learn at one scale are very appropriately applied to other scales as well.
And I would probably say lastly, Laura, I was just talking with our director, Ming, because he had to head off to the meeting, but we're going to try and put something up on our CM Squared website that's sort of my intro to mega regions with a little bit more. I'm going to work with our students and with Ming and with Anessa, and we'll put a little bit together so that you can sort of have a quick primer so you can be, mega regional proficient, so to speak. You can speak mega region, and then it can help you weave that into discussions and discourse, because I also think that's the other thing, just talking the talk sometimes helps as well. And then certainly we will make sure these slides are available to you, and certainly I can, Amy is definitely a great resource in sort of helping you to think things through, and she's always very, very willing to communicate with anyone. She certainly has.
Slide at the very end of Amy's presentation so that we can show the SurveyMonkey address. And while you're doing that, I will ask if Susan Martinovich or Maggie is participating today. If so, would you all like to say anything? Okay, maybe not. I can't see the whole login list, but those two folks provide a lot of leadership nationally and internationally for WTS. So I appreciate Lisa's reminder to just extend our gratitude to those folks who provide leadership to our organization. Again, our SurveyMonkey link is just 5 or so quick questions. So that will just take a second for you all to fill out. In the meantime, we're ending at about 1:20, which I think is just fine for a Friday. We definitely appreciate, there you go. We definitely appreciate everyone taking the time to participate. We absolutely appreciate Lisa for emceeing, and Dr. Goodwin and Dr. Lewis, Amy St. Peter, Dr. Wilson, you all have given us so much to think about. We really appreciate the visuals and the information that you've shared with us today. We will send around the SurveyMonkey link as well as the professional to participate with us today. Does anyone have any parting words? Very last thing, I would like to thank again CM Squared as our technical sponsor, and the WTS Southwest region really appreciates your participation today, and we hope everybody has a great weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.